times when I felt so alone, but in that lonely hour, God made it a precious hour for Jesus let me know that I was His own. Now I can say through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. Through it all, I've learned to depend upon His word. So now I thank God for the mountain. Thank Him for the valleys. Thank Him for the storms He's brought me through. For if I never had a problem, I never know that God can solve them. I never know what faith in the Word of God can do. Now I can say through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus. Oh, I've learned to trust in God. Through it all, I've learned to depend upon His word. You should thank God for the mountain. Thank Him for the valley. May not look like it right now. Thank Him for the storm He's bringing you through. For if you never had a problem, you never know that God can solve it. You never know a thing in the Word of God can do. Now you can say through it all, yeah. I've learned to trust in Jesus. Oh, I've learned to trust in God. Through it all, I've learned to depend upon His word. Through the fire, through the rain, I've learned to depend upon His word. Through my tears and pain, I've learned to depend upon His word. Depend upon His word. Oh, that's good stuff. As Jesus and His disciples were on their way, He came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to Him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what He said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to Him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha." That's a TH, not an SH. The Lord answered, "You are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." John chapter 11. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary, and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped His feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When He heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet when He heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Then He said to His disciples, let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you are going back there. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of his disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, T-H, not S-H, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. He stinks. So they took away the stone, but let me go back, across the entrance, from 9, just once more, I'm going, it was a cave, but some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with the stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone. He said, but Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he's been there 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen, and a cloth around his face, Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." I had the privilege of not only being Marsha's brother-in-law, but also her pastor when I pastored at Community Assembly of God in Middletown. I thought I would never have to do a sermon for a while, but of course, Marsha wanted me to do a sermon when she passed. And so I'm here, and I'm going to give you a sermon. It's 3 points, and it's for her. She endured my countless long-windedness in Middletown, and I hope you won't today. She loved Scotland and men in kilts. George the most. I'll miss her tying the laces over our socks. She was good at that, because mine always fell down when she did this little special knot thing. She knew how to tie the best and how everything was to be worn and its significance. I loved her as a sister-in-law, a parishioner, and a friend. And this message is in her honor and is a textbook 3-point sermon, of which she heard many in her life. And of course it has 3 points, so follow along as we honor Marsha and her service to Christ today. In many ways, these stories that I read in the New Testament concerning Martha epitomize my thoughts concerning Marsha. I always viewed Marsha as a Martha type. In the Luke account, Jesus wasn't saying that Martha wasn't spiritual, but that she just needed to focus on better things. But most importantly, Martha shows that she was much more than a hard worker. She was a spiritual person, as we read later on in her declaration of faith to Jesus, knowing that he was the Son of God in John's account. Marsha was like Martha. She was the oldest. She was responsible. She was always doing all the work and had to take care of her snotty-nosed little brother and sisters. No, okay, sorry. Marsha, like Martha, was a doer. Marsha was the one who told it like it was. Like Martha at the grave, "He stinks!" Martha said at the resurrection, by this time it's a bad odor. And how many times did Marsha just tell it like it was? She just laid it down the line. And I love that about our Marsha. She did not mince words, and when something stunk, she called it out. It had to be practical, it had to be hard work. Let's get the job done. And ultimately, both of these accounts in Scripture lead to the resurrection of Lazarus through the power of Christ from the dead. And Jesus was a friend to this family. He was a friend to Martha. He was a friend to Mary and to Lazarus. He actually had a relationship with them. He went and ate with them, and supped with them, and talked with them. And I found it interesting when you read that one account. It said, and Jesus loved Martha. Jesus loved Martha. And that's the thing. Ultimately, it's the relationship with Jesus that Martha counted on. John 11:5 stated that Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. And that's the crux of this entire story of Martha and Marsha today and of this event. Both Martha and Marsha were loved by Jesus and knew Jesus. Jesus stayed at Martha's home. Jesus was a friend and confidant. Jesus ate and spoke with her. And I can say emphatically that Jesus stayed at Marsha, Leah, Mills, McQueen's house as well. I'd like to share with you, and here's the 3 points, 3 characteristics of the passages that express Martha's relationship with Jesus. And in a lot of ways, I think Marsha emulated these characteristics as well. Ultimately, Martha and Marsha had a relationship with Jesus that made all the difference in their lives. Point number 1. It says in Luke chapter 10:38 that Martha owned a home and opened her home to Jesus. Martha opened the home to a Jewish carpenter who was a vagabond rabbi and all of his dirty followers. Opened up her home. The key point is that Martha had an open house to all. She opened it to whomever. Martha made friends with Jesus and wanted to make sure his needs and those of his followers were taken care of. I can't think of anything more than Marsha McQueen at this point. Marsha opened her house to one and all. Many of you came to know George and Marsha because they opened their house literally to you. Marsha's home was a source of pride. Everything was in order. I can remember after her death and we went back to the house, I was still worried about where to put the soap because I was afraid she'd be mad at me if I didn't put it in the right spot. I said, whoa, wait a minute, she's in heaven now. Martha had a house of love. Everything was in order, but it was open to everyone. There was not one part of her house that wasn't open to all. She kept many people at her home. It was loving, in order, and you know that Jesus was there. The stories of Marsha's generosity are unlimited. Marsha had a way of making you feel at home. She made sure your needs were taken care of. I always remember going to wherever Marsha lived, Lakeport, Orland, Lower Lake, Middletown, and then eventually Sacramento. And when you were there, it was about making sure you had what you needed. She was a true servant. The last several years in Sacramento, literally George and Marsha's house was like a Hilton. Scores of people spent the night or lived with George and Marsha. You literally had to call Marsha ahead of time, make a reservation, and book it on booking.com. And you know, Marsha did not disappoint. I look forward to spending